Hello and welcome to the Housing and Services Resource Center's virtual workshop series, Identifying and Building Partnerships with Your Local Housing Sector. The series consists of 3 brief virtual workshops. This first virtual workshop will cover some introductory housing concepts. In the second virtual workshop, you will learn about specific housing programs, including public housing and HUD-assisted housing programs. The third and final virtual workshop will provide you with some strategies for engaging your local officials. These virtual workshops are a product of the Housing and Services Resource Center, or HSRC, which is a partnership between the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. The HSRC is administered by the Administration for Community Living, ACL, through a contract with Mission Analytics, which subcontracts the work to U.S. Aging. The HSRC fosters collaboration and partnerships between the organizations and systems that work to help people live successfully and stably in the community, such as those providing housing resources, homelessness resources, healthcare and mental health services, independent living services, home and community-based services, supportive services, and more. At the end of the virtual workshop, we hope you will look at the HSRC website at acl.gov/housing and services. To cultivate these cross-sector partnerships, the HSRC coordinates technical assistance across the federal agencies, facilitates state and local partnerships between housing, disability, aging, and health service providers, identifies and shares innovations and promising practices from housing and services collaborations, assists stakeholders in finding ways to leverage and align resources to make community living possible for more people. For more information about partnership opportunities, go to acl.gov, click on HSRC. There you will find this fact sheet and much more information. In order for people with disabilities of all ages to have access to both the housing and the services and supports they need to live in the community, there must be partnerships at the federal, state, and local levels between housing and service systems and every organization that supports the goal of community living. Affordable and accessible housing with supportive services is vital to optimizing the health of people with disabilities and older adults and providing them with full opportunity to participate in community life. Partnerships between the housing sector and the aging and disability networks enhance the range of housing for the growing and changing needs of people of all ages with disabilities and older adults. When a person experiences problems with finding and securing housing that is affordable, accessible, and supportive, their risk for homelessness increases. People with disabilities are more likely to experience homelessness, and researchers project the number of older people who are homeless will continue to rise. Partnerships among homelessness assistance agencies, the aging and disability networks, and the housing sector, as well as other sectors such as transportation, can help reduce risk and swiftly transition people who are experiencing homelessness into more stable housing. And we know that partnerships require a commitment. The Brookings Institution thinks of this commitment as connective tissue. It is their way of describing the infrastructure needed to support intentional alignment, coordination, and integration between sectors or organizations that serve the same or similar populations in a community. Infrastructure refers to both tangible elements, such as information exchange systems, financing, personnel, shared language, as well as the intangible elements of trust and shared goals. Developing systems and trust that address cross-sector needs does not happen. It requires a deliberate process that moves beyond the goals of any one system towards a community-wide approach. The affordable housing programs we will focus on in this virtual workshop series offer people with disabilities and older adults income-based rents. That means the rent is based on what each tenant can afford based on their personal household income. The affordable housing programs that are the focus of this series are structured so the tenant generally pays 30 to 40% of their income for rent, and an agency pays the difference between that amount, which is also called the tenant share, and the total rent for the unit. The agency could be a state or local public housing agency, but could also be a state or local human service agency or a nonprofit provider under contract with a government agency. Let's look at an example. The 2023 SSI federal benefit for an individual is $914, although some states do provide a state supplement. 30% of $914 is $274. So a tenant with an income of $914 will pay $274 for rent and utilities. If the rent for the unit is $950, for example, the tenant will pay $274, and the agency administering the program pays $676, or the difference between $950 and $274. If the tenant's income increases, their share of the rent will increase, and if their income decreases, their share will decrease. The difference between the tenant's share and the total rent is often called a subsidy or rental assistance. There are two different types of income-based rental assistance: tenant-based and project-based rental assistance. You may also hear rental assistance referred to as a subsidy or a voucher. Both tenant-based and project-based subsidies help individual households afford housing. Both provide payments to make up the difference between the amount a household can afford to pay for housing and the local rent standards, as we just reviewed. The difference is that tenant-based rental assistance, or TBRA, moves with the tenant. If the household no longer wishes to rent a particular unit, the household may take its tenant-based rental assistance and move to another rental property. Tenant-based rental assistance programs offer a household the opportunity to choose its neighborhood, including school district, as well as its type of housing, such as a single-family home, large apartment building, duplex, garden-style unit, etc. If the household needs to change location, the household may take the tenant-based rental assistance along when it moves to another rental unit. In contrast, project-based rental assistance is tied to a building or a specific number of units in the building. The assistance stays with the unit after a tenant moves out. The next person to move into the unit becomes the beneficiary of that rent subsidy. For our final introductory concept, let's discuss the owners or the agencies that administer this rental assistance. Today, we will talk about two primary providers of this rental assistance. The first are public housing agencies, or PHAs. A PHA is any state, county, municipality, or other governmental entity that is authorized to engage or assist in the development or operation of low-income housing under the U.S. Housing Act of 1973. PHAs generally own and manage public housing properties and administer Section 8 housing choice voucher programs. They may also own other types of affordable housing and administer other programs that help their residents. We sometimes think of PHAs as one-stop shopping because you may be able to apply for many different properties as well as a tenant-based rental assistance program, such as the Housing Choice Voucher or the Emergency Housing Voucher Program. There are an estimated 3,300 PHAs across the United States. You'll learn more about these important agencies in the second workshop in this series. The second key provider of rental assistance are private developers. State and federal agencies offer private developers, including for-profit and nonprofit developers, grants, low-interest loans, and other financial incentives in exchange for the development of housing that includes at least a portion of affordable housing units. These properties have project-based subsidies only. Two examples of privately developed affordable housing properties are referred to as the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit and the Section 202 Elderly Housing Projects. We will also talk more about these programs in the next workshop. Now that you've learned these foundational concepts, we have a few quizzes so you can test your knowledge. We have 3 quiz questions. For each quiz, review the quiz question and then pause the virtual workshop while you consider your answer. Once you have your answer, restart the virtual workshop and you'll see if you are correct. Quiz question number 1. True or false? PHAs only administer tenant-based affordable housing programs. False. PHAs can administer tenant-based programs like the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program and project-based programs like the Public Housing Program. Quiz number 2. True or false? A rental subsidy is equal to 30% of the rent for a unit. False. A rental subsidy is equal to the difference between 30% of the tenant's income and the rent for the unit. The difference between the tenant share and the total rent is often called a subsidy or rental assistance. If the tenant's income increases, their share of the rent will increase, and if their income decreases, their share will decrease. The tenant generally pays 30 to 40% of their income for rent, and an agency pays the difference between that amount, again called the tenant share, and the total rent for the unit. Quiz number 3. True or false? If a tenant moves into an affordable housing project with a tenant-based voucher, they can take the voucher with them to the next rental unit. True. If a tenant moves into an affordable housing project with a tenant-based voucher, they can take the voucher with them to the next rental unit. Tenant-based vouchers are associated with a tenant and can go with a tenant to their next rental unit. In this first brief virtual workshop, we reviewed the fundamental concepts of income-based rent, rental subsidies, the differences between tenant and project-based subsidies, and 2 key affordable housing entities, public housing agencies and private assisted housing developers. And remember, the HSRC is your resource center. Please email us at hsrc@acl.hhs.gov about your questions about this virtual workshop, technical assistance needs, website suggestions, and your own cross-sector partnerships. And check out the HSRC website at acl.gov/housing and services. Thank you for your interest in learning more about housing. Visit workshop number 2 to learn more about public housing and private assisted housing resources.